June 29th, 1999. It's just after 3:00 a.m. at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. The air in the server room is cold, sterile, and filled with the low, hypnotic hum of 1,000 machines thinking in unison. This is one of the digital brains of NASA, a place where calculations are made that keep human beings alive in the dead vacuum of space. But tonight, the hum is off-key. A single monitor, then another, flashes a crimson alert. An unauthorized user, deep inside the network, a systems administrator, pale under the fluorescent lights, stares at his screen. His fingers tremble slightly over the keyboard. Someone is moving through their most secure servers with an impossible, ghostly speed. They aren't just looking, they're taking things. He watches, helpless, as a file transfer begins. The file name is cryptic, but its size is staggering. It's the source code for the International Space Station's environmental control systems, the software that manages the oxygen, the temperature, the pressure, the fragile man-made bubble of life orbiting 250 miles above the Earth. It's worth 1.7 million, but its real value is incalculable. Panic ripples through the chain of command. Calls are made, voices are hushed, then sharp with disbelief. They are locked in a digital war with an enemy they cannot see. An enemy who has bypassed firewalls designed to stop foreign intelligence agencies. For 21 days, NASA makes an unthinkable decision. They pull the plug. They shut down their network. The digital heartbeat of the American space program goes flat. Miles away, in the humid quiet of a South Florida suburb, the only light in a teenager's bedroom comes from a glowing CRT monitor. The screen is a cascade of green text on a black background. Jonathan James, age 15, watches the download progress bar inch across the screen. He can hear his own heart beating in the silence of the house. He isn't a spy. He isn't a terrorist. He's a boy in a faded t-shirt who had found a door that was left unlocked. But he has no idea that with every kilobyte that flows through his dial-up modem, he is not just stealing data. He is pulling a pin on a grenade, and the federal government has just started the clock on finding him. How does a kid who hasn't even learned to drive yet hijack the digital keys to the kingdom? And what is he searching for in the silent, starlit world of code? Before he was Zero Amraid, the ghost in the machine, Jonathan James was just a quiet, intensely curious kid growing up in the manicured suburbs of Pinecrest, Florida. The world of the 1990s was one of analog rules and physical boundaries, a world that felt too small, too slow for a mind like his. While other kids were outside, chasing balls and scraping knees, Jonathan was drawn to the incandescent glow of a different universe, the one that lived inside his father's computer. It started, as these things often do, with games. But for Jonathan, the game wasn't just about winning. It was about understanding the rules so intimately that he could break them. He didn't just want to play Doom. He wanted to understand how Doom worked. He taught himself C, the dense, unforgiving language of programmers, not in a classroom, but from books and late-night bulletin board systems. The nascent internet of the 90s was a digital Wild West, a frontier of unclaimed territory populated by explorers, academics, and eccentrics. For a teenage loner, it was a home. It was a place where your age didn't matter, your name didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was what you knew, and Jonathan wanted to know everything. His curiosity was a form of hunger. He began to explore. He wasn't looking for money or fame. He was chasing the thrill of the puzzle. A locked system wasn't a barrier. It was a challenge. A password prompt was a riddle waiting to be solved. His first forays were small, almost innocent. He poked around the network of his local school district, Miami-Dade County Schools, leaving behind digital footprints so subtle they were almost undetectable. He saw vulnerabilities not as flaws, but as invitations. He felt the rush of walking through a door that was supposed to be sealed shut, of seeing what he was not supposed to see. But the suburbs were a small pond. Soon, he looked for bigger oceans. He turned his attention to Bell South, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the country. To him, its network was a sprawling, beautiful machine, a web of connections that spanned cities. He wanted to see how it was built. Slipping past their corporate security, he wandered their internal servers, reading emails, studying network diagrams, learning the secret architecture of the connected world. He was a tourist in a forbidden city. He took nothing. He broke nothing. But he left a name behind, a digital tag scrawled on the walls of their secure servers. C0M RAID. It was a declaration. I was here. You didn't even know it. But But this was just the training ground. His curiosity was pulling him towards something bigger, something that wasn't on Earth at all. His digital wanderings through Bell South had taught him the language of corporate security, its predictable patterns and lazy assumptions. But it was just a stepping stone. A bigger puzzle was calling to him. A system so vast and complex it was said to be unbreakable. The United States government. From his bedroom, surrounded by posters and discarded soda cans, Jonathan began to map the outer defenses of the Department of Defense. It was the digital equivalent of walking up to a fortress and checking every window and door, not with a battering ram, but with a feather. He scanned relentlessly, sending out tiny, invisible pings of data, listening for the echoes. Most servers were silent, shielded behind layers of impenetrable code. But then he found one. A server in Dulles, Virginia, that responded with a faint electronic whisper. It was a weak signal, a digital seam in an otherwise perfect wall. The server belonged to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA, a branch of the military tasked with countering weapons of mass destruction. The irony was a siren's call. The very agency designed to protect America from existential threats had left a door ajar. This wasn't a brute force attack. It was surgery. With patient, precise keystrokes, Jonathan exploited a known vulnerability in the server's operating system. Once inside, he didn't set off alarms or ransack the place. He moved like a phantom. His first act was to install a backdoor, a secret piece of software known as a sniffer. This program was his invisible eye. It sat silently on the DTRA network, watching everything, recording everything. It was designed to do one thing: capture the digital traffic flowing between machines, specifically the packets of data that contained usernames and passwords. He set his trap, and then he waited. The harvest was beyond anything he had imagined. Over the course of weeks, his backdoor captured the credentials of dozens of DTRA employees, from low-level analysts to high-ranking officials. He had their usernames. He had their passwords. He had the keys to their digital lives. He began to explore the network not as an intruder, but as an employee. He slipped into a mail server that handled communications for the entire agency. He read thousands of internal emails. He saw the mundane chatter of office life colliding with classified intelligence. He saw the bureaucracy, the personalities, the secrets. He was a ghost walking the halls of power, learning the names, the hierarchies, the language of an organization that didn't know he existed. But reading emails was just a means to an end. He was looking for a map. And buried in the terabytes of data, he found one. He discovered the network topography that showed how this DTRA server connected to other government agencies. He saw the lines of trust that had been established between them, the digital handshakes that allowed secure communication. And that's when he saw the name that made his breath catch in his throat. A trusted connection. A direct pathway from this military server to the digital heart of the Marshall Space Flight Center. NASA, the ultimate target. He had found his way to the foot of the mountain. Now, he was going to climb it. The jump from the DTRA server to NASA's network wasn't like breaking down a door. It was like using a stolen diplomatic passport. The two agencies had a trusted relationship, a digital bridge built between them for the seamless exchange of information. Jonathan, masquerading as a DoD employee, simply walked across it. The moment he passed through NASA's firewalls, the digital landscape changed. The cold, utilitarian corridors of the military network gave way to something that felt like a cathedral of science. This was the place where humanity dreamed. He moved through the servers with a quiet reverence. He was an archaeologist in a lost city, unearthing wonders at every turn. He saw data streams from the Hubble Space Telescope, complex orbital mechanics calculations, and engineering schematics for rockets that had yet to be built. He read emails between engineers arguing over thrust ratios and scientists debating the possibility of microbial life on Mars. For a boy who felt most at home in the abstract world of logic and code, this was paradise. It was a place where the biggest questions in the universe were being asked and sometimes answered. He wasn't just a hacker anymore. He was an explorer. His explorations eventually led him to a server at the Marshall Space Flight Center. And this server was different. It was unprotected. It was the digital equivalent of finding a vault door left wide open, and inside that vault was one of NASA's crown jewels. It was a proprietary piece of software, elegant and impossibly complex. As he read the documentation, he realized what he had found. It was the source code that controlled the critical life support functions of the International Space Station. The code that regulated humidity, managed carbon dioxide levels, and controlled temperature for the astronauts living in orbit. It was the digital blueprint for survival in the most hostile environment imaginable. The decision to take it wasn't born of malice. It was an impulse, the collector's instinct. It was the Mona Lisa of code, and he was the only one in the room. He initiated the download, and in that moment, the entire operation shifted from a silent, ghostly intrusion to a loud, clumsy theft. The limiting factor wasn't NASA's security. It was his own dial-up modem. The whine of the connection filled his small bedroom as the massive file began its slow, perilous journey through the phone lines of South Florida. The progress bar on his screen became a symbol of his gamble. Each percentage point was a victory. Each passing minute was an eternity where he could be discovered. Outside his window, the world slept. Inside his room, a 15-year-old boy was siphoning the secrets of space travel through a copper wire, completely unaware that on the other end of that connection, in the cold server rooms of Huntsville, the first silent crimson alarms had begun to bloom on screens. He had knocked on heaven's door and walked inside. Now he was trying to steal a piece of it, and the owners were starting to wake up. For the technicians and federal agents staring at the breach, it was an act of impossible audacity. The ghost in their machine had not only waltzed through the front door, but had also walked out with the blueprints to the castle. The download of the ISS software was a violation so profound that it triggered a complete system quarantine. The order came down from the highest levels. Shut it all down. For 21 agonizing days, a significant portion of NASA's computer network was taken offline. The cost of the shutdown and the subsequent security overhaul would climb to over $41,000 a day. Research was frozen, communications were crippled, and the world's most advanced space agency was left feeling violated and vulnerable. The hunt for COM-RAID began immediately. This was no longer a simple network security issue. It was a matter of national security. A joint task force was assembled, a high-tech posse of investigators from the Department of Defense and NASA's own Inspector General's office. These were the best digital detectives the country had. Men and women who lived and breathed in the world of code and data packets. Their job was to follow a trail of whispers and echoes back to its source, to give a face to the phantom who had humbled them. They started at Ground Zero, the compromised server at Marshall Space Flight Center. The digital crime scene was meticulously analyzed. They found the entry point, the faint electronic footprints leading back across the trusted bridge to the DTRA server in Dulles, Virginia. The investigators moved with grim determination, retracing the hacker's path. When they accessed the DTRA server, they found the nest. They found the backdoor sniffer program that COM-RAID had installed, his invisible eye. And crucially, they found its logs. The sniffer had recorded a wealth of information, a catalog of every connection made to the server while it was active. It was a haystack of data, filled with IP addresses from across the globe. The digital fingerprints of every visitor, legitimate or otherwise. The team began the painstaking work of tracing each one. Most were red herrings, leading to university computers or public terminals. But one stood out. It resolved to a commercial internet service provider, Bell South. And the connection wasn't from a server in Moscow or Beijing. It was from a residential account in South Florida. Suddenly, the profile of their suspect shifted. This wasn't a state-sponsored cyber espionage unit. The signature was too personal, too brazen. With a federal warrant, investigators descended on Bell South's headquarters. They cross-referenced the IP address with the exact timestamps of the NASA intrusion. The search, which had begun in the vastness of the federal network, now narrowed with terrifying speed. They followed the digital thread from NASA to the DoD to Bell South, and finally, down to a single account. A single phone line, a single address in a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac in Pinecrest, Florida. They still didn't have a name, but they knew which house the ghost lived in. and federal agents were already planning the visit. On the morning of January 26, 2000, the sun rose over Pinecrest, Florida, just as it always did, casting a warm glow on the manicured lawns and quiet, empty streets. But on this morning, a strange silence was broken by the arrival of a convoy of unmarked cars. They moved without haste, parking along the curb with practiced efficiency. Inside were agents from the Department of Defense, NASA, and the local Pinecrest police. They had their warrant. They had their target. They walked up the driveway to the James family home, their footsteps loud in the suburban quiet. The knock on the door was the sound of two worlds colliding. Jonathan's father opened it to find a group of grim-faced men in suits. The initial confusion gave way to a dawning, sickening realization as they presented the search warrant. The agents swept into the house, their movements professional and direct. They weren't interested in the living room or the kitchen. They knew where they were going. They went straight to Jonathan's bedroom. They found him there, a skinny 16-year-old kid, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of a teenager's life. In this room, he had been a digital god, a phantom who could walk through walls built by the world's best engineers. But now, under the cold gaze of federal agents, he was just a boy, pale and stunned. His computer, the source of his power, was now evidence. His portal to the universe was sealed with yellow tape. During the interrogation, there was no grand denial. Faced with the mountain of digital evidence, the IP logs, the sniffer program, the stolen NASA source code sitting on his hard drive, Jonathan didn't fight. He confessed. In fact, he did more than that. He explained. With a detached, almost academic pride, he walked the stunned agents through his methods. He detailed the vulnerabilities he'd found, the security protocols he'd bypassed. He spoke not like a criminal confessing to a crime, but like a magician revealing the secrets to a trick. The agents listened in disbelief. Their target, the phantom who had caused a multi-million-dollar shutdown and a national security crisis, was a brilliant, bored teenager who did it all because he was curious. The legal system had never seen a case quite like it. He was a minor, but his crimes were federal, committed against the most powerful institutions in the country. The Department of Justice decided to make an example of him. Jonathan James became the first juvenile in American history to be sentenced to prison for hacking. The judge handed down a sentence of 6 months in a juvenile detention center. But the cruelest part of the punishment was the probation that would follow. Upon his release, he would be strictly forbidden from owning or using a computer for non-educational purposes. It was a digital death sentence. They were taking away the only world where he had ever truly felt alive. As he was led away, the boy who called himself Comrade was gone, replaced by a federal inmate number. He had flown too close to the sun, and now he was about to learn what it felt like to have his wings melted away.